Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, greetings, and welcome to this special episode of African News Review. As you can see on the screen, we have a special guest, but before we get to him, I'll do the honors of introducing my co-host, Ayafubere Nelly Esquire. She's the author of Your Self-Love Revolution. Also, Kwanzaa, A Celebration. She's the host of Rethinking Freedom 98.5, Killeen, Texas, co-host Women in Resistance. Welcome, sister.
Thank you. It is an incredible honor to be with this giant historian who is exposing so much of what we need to know, and I hope figure out how we move forward.
Yes. And she said the giant. Well, the giant, clearly you can see on the screen, he might be poorly under the weather, but he has made an effort to be with us today. He is an internationally renowned historian and journalist. He's the executive editor of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, editor of LeftWord books, and a correspondent for Globetrotter Media. He's the author of more than 20 books, including The Darker Nations, A People History of the Third World, Washington Bullets, CIA Coups and the Assassination, and one of his more recent works on Cuba, Reflections on 70 Years of Revolution and Struggle, which he did with Noam Chomsky. He's been described, in the words of journalist Amitava Kuvar, that Mr. Prashad is our own Front Fanon. Wow, that is,
yeah,
that
I
is.
know. I know. You found it.
So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Comrade Vijay Prashad. Welcome.
Hey, thanks a lot. It's great to be with you. What a time to be with you.
What a time.
What a time. Yes. I'm minded we start talking now. The hour might go quickly. So without further ado, let me first ask you, how did you come into writing and history?
Well, it pulls you in, doesn't it? If you're interested in people, and that's the starting point, I like stories and people. If you're interested in people and their stories, you start to collect them. And then when you collect their stories and you have an abundance of them, you feel the need to write them down. Part of that is also explaining tragedies. How do you get past terrible things? As a young person in India, I witnessed some pretty terrible things, riots and violence and so on. And I started writing about them because, as I said, regardless of the horrors in the world, if you love people, you share the, overwhelming sense of hope in and possibility. Because people are peculiar. I've visited all kinds of places around the world where people have been through very difficult trials, terrible wars, generations of theft of themselves, of their resources and so on. And yet people have such entrancing stories to tell you, because they're either stories of fights or of myths or doesn't matter, legends. They want to share these. And, I find that captivating. I'll give you one story just to get us going in that direction. I was recently in Burkina Faso and in Ouagadougou. One thing I found interesting.
So glad you're bringing up Burkina Faso because I have a question for you on that.
Okay, great. Well, it's interesting because you travel around the country and there are almost no pictures of Ibrahim Traore. Now, it's interesting because he's called in the West a dictator, and the aesthetics of dictatorship are typically to put up big pictures of the dictator, to celebrate the dictator as the one leader and so on. But strikingly, I found that it was the absence of the pictures that, I was taken by. So I asked people, where can I buy pictures or photographs of Captain Ibrahim Traore? Now, I was asking as a journalist, I wasn't, looking to put up a picture in my room, although why not? He's a heroic figure. So I went to the bazaar, the largest bazaar in the city, and I found shops selling T-shirts of pictures of Traore with Sankara and others. And then there were some pictures of him, but again, handmade, meaning they were not made by the government. They were made in a haphazard way. So I asked people, why aren't there pictures of Ibrahim Traore on the, and one woman said to me, and obviously this is the line you use. She said to me, why should we have a picture of him on a billboard? He lives in our hearts. Now that's interesting. That reveals something to me. So when you ask, what gets you writing? Well, what gets you writing is a fact that people say the most interesting things. And if I didn't write that down and share it or speak that out here and share it, I think I've done a disservice to the act of listening and to her act of speaking, because she said something pretty profound. Yeah. So why do we write? We write because we listen and because we love people. That's the key thing.
Okay. Sister.
So this is jumping way in. I thought we would kind of lead up into this. Just going through, if I start with Washington Bullets, in some of the commentary, I want to read from something that he said here. He said, the government that stands against imperialism and stands with its people has to be portrayed as out of touch and isolated long before the tanks leave the barracks. So you were talking about the steps. Obviously, you know this, but for our audience, you were talking about the steps before the coups take place. This isolation has to appear as a natural process. No longer is the government a government, but a regime. No longer is it a democratic government, but an autocratic regime. In the case of Traore and the work that he's doing in Burkina Faso, and then even just looking at the Sahel as a whole, based on your research, the work that you've done, how do you expect things to turn out?
It's actually it's a really interesting question, and I think we need to ask people other than myself. One of the people we need to talk to is Marco Rubio, for instance, and the people at the U.S. State Department. We also should talk to the government in Burkina Faso and also the governments in Mali and Niger. And let me explain why I said all that. Number one, the United States and France have been humiliated by the alliance of Sahel states, which is Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. These three countries have not only said that they want France out of their territory, which has happened, but they want the United States to withdraw from the large military base it has in Niger, in Agadez. It's the world's largest drone base. They want the US completely out, and it's actually mostly gone. So this is an enormous humiliation, but also a strategic defeat, because the US has wanted to control the Sahara for various reasons. One is the Sahara, of course, important journey, unfortunately, for desperate migrants from various parts of Africa, including Nigeria. But in my view, also because of the major smuggling networks in the Sahara, which the United States has wanted to either control or to get rid of: gold smuggling, weapons smuggling, the role of various smuggling operations, including Al-Qaeda. So the US has used these bases to have a footprint in the middle of Africa, and that's gone. So they're trying to get this back militarily. The US now has a base in the airport in Accra, in Ghana, which supplies the military base the US is building in northern Nigeria. Now, it's very interesting. The US, at a conference in Brazil, released a map of Africa in a slideshow, and they got it all wrong. They had Nigeria as a landlocked country, and they moved Cote d'Ivoire from the west to the Horn of Africa. There were other errors, but the most important was they got Nigeria wrong. Why this is important is there are some 100 or so US troops there, so I hope they don't lose them. They are on the northern border of Nigeria, and the United States and France are building military bases in Kenya. Now, that's interesting. 3 English-speaking countries. I always hesitate to say English-speaking. As you know, in any African country, when we say Francophone or Anglophone, this is a myth because these countries are about 95% non-English speaking. Yeah, they have their own languages. But by and large, these were former British colonies, not French colonies. And these 3, Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya, have military presence from the West, which they will use to strike Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. That's one problem that Marco Rubio might be able to help us with. What is your plan for the U.S. military base in Nigeria and Kenya? Why is there a U.S. military presence in Nigeria? What is it for? It's definitely not there for Boko Haram. It's not there for Boko Haram because that's not the U.S.'s problem. Trump bombed northern Nigeria, but really he bombed a bunch of villages which have now become a base. Was the purpose of that bombing to create the base? I don't know these answers to this. Is for Pete Hegseth and company and not for us. Okay. Second problem, within the Alliance of Sahel states, there are some problems, political problems. For instance, Mali has unfortunately got into a tangle with Algeria. As a consequence, Mali has kind of made overtures towards Morocco. Now, this is a serious problem for Burkina Faso because Burkina Faso has very good relations with Algeria and understands Morocco because Morocco signed the Abraham Accords to be in close ties with Israel and so on. And they do not want to welcome Israeli influence into the alliance. But Mali, which is politically much weaker, and unfortunately has got into this tangle with Algeria. So my feeling is, if these 3 countries can't sort out their political problems, once again, we will divide amongst each other and welcome them in. And whether they come by air or not, it's a dangerous foreboding, in my opinion. And so watch this very carefully. Watch to see if Mali, which is politically weak as a consequence of a major fight against various foes, including Al-Qaeda in the north, but also the Azawad liberation groups, it blames Algeria, saying Algeria is assisting them. I'm not sure Algeria is assisting the Azawad group. Mali, unable to create a peace or militarily defeat these groups, has, I think, gotten into the trap of falling into this Algeria versus Morocco rivalry. Now, these are all the rivalries that continue to tear Africa apart, just to put it bluntly. It's not just Morocco versus Algeria or Mali versus Algeria, etc. This problem is there across a continent. I mean, Ghana versus Cote d'Ivoire, that tussle has meant that cocoa prices have never been properly controlled. Because if these 2 countries got together, they would dominate the cocoa market. I mean, imagine this. Cote d'Ivoire
they are coming together. There was a recent story on Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria, and what's the 4th country? Cameroon coming together to work on these cocoa prices as a bloc.
That's exactly correct. But remember, we are in 2026. This should have happened 50 years ago. It's a bit late now because these countries also have economic problems. So they don't have the capacity. I mean, it's a scandal that in the 1960s, even the military governments in the region didn't think of industrializing sufficiently to produce chocolate products. from cocoa. I mean, why have these countries continued to export raw cocoa to Europe, which has no raw cocoa? And then we talk about Swiss chocolates. We talk about chocolates from France or whatever. I mean, you know the phrase Swiss chocolate, but you don't know the phrase Ghanaian chocolate, or chocolat de Côte d'Ivoire. Why not? And that's so, yeah, you're right. These things are happening a little bit now, but it may also be a little too late because they're going to have to start branding. And so our differences are fatal, in my opinion. And this one between Mali and Burkina, for instance, could really be a problem unless they resolve their differences.
I mean, you at the start, you said you went to Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. So I want to go back there a second, because this week, July 29th, marked the 39 years when Sankara delivered a speech at the Organization of African Unity about the debt problem. The nutshell of it was, if he stood alone, he won't be at the next meeting. But if they stood together, yes, they can go against it. And in Washington Bullets, you mentioned the Bretton Woods organizations. I'll allow you to explain what they are. How do you think those organizations have impacted on Africa since?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Grief Chelva, who's an economist from Zambia, and I have just done a book called How the International Monetary Fund Strangles Africa. The book is out from Inkani Books in Johannesburg. We were very interested in a simple proposition. If you teach economics on the African continent, you should start with the following conundrum for your students. Let's take the example of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The DRC, Congo, has about roughly, this is calculated, an estimate, $3 trillion of minerals and metals. That's an astounding wealth, roughly 3 trillion. Now, the DRC, Congo, at the same time, is calculated to be one of the poorest countries in the world. So I would ask my students, I would say to them, listen, students, we've got this problem. You have one of the world's richest countries in the world, which has one of the world's poorest populations. Explain it to me. How is that possible? Explain it to me. Let's see what the students, African students, come up with. But the chances are they'll talk about colonialism. They'll say that yes, the Congo was seized by one man. Actually, it wasn't even a colony. It was a personal ownership. King Leopold II personally owned the Congo, and he leached the wealth for decades. Yeah, they just took the wealth out. They brutalized the people. They killed millions of people in the Congo and so on, destroyed the agriculture. Okay. At independence, say the students, the people voted for a very decent man, Patrice Lumumba, who had a plan to help use the minerals and metals of the Congo to sort out the problems of his people, but they killed him. They didn't let him go forward. In his place, they put, Mr. Mobutu, who then, quote-unquote, Africanizes the country, changes the name to Zaire, gives himself a more African-sounding name, but at the same time, effectively westernizes the economy. So he Africanizes his name. By the way, this is sort of a decolonial trick. He Africanizes his name, But he effectively westernizes the economy, lets multinational European companies come and just take what they want, do what they want with the people of the Congo. Okay? The best moment, by the way, of the whole of Mobutu's reign was the Ali fight in Zaire. Yeah, that
the
was
rumble in the
the best
jungle.
moment. Rumble in the jungle. Yeah. Otherwise, it was miserable. So you have, firstly, colonial theft. Then you have what Kwame Nkrumah says is neocolonial continuation of that theft by other means. So it's theft nonetheless. Then you have the Bretton Woods institution created in 1944 in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. You have these Bretton Woods institutions, the International Monetary Fund in the lead, coming in and telling these countries that they must not spend money on health and education. This is key. If you don't spend your money on education, you don't build your own capacity to govern and manage yourself. You are then prey to what we call brain capture. Your brains are captured by the IMF. Yeah, so your economists start to parrot the IMF's ideas. You don't have authentic thinking. You don't start your economics class at the University of Kinshasa. You don't start your class asking students, we are the richest country with the poorest population, explain. You start your class with standard microeconomic theory about demand and supply. Yeah, you pretend as if the Congo is just another economy. It's just like the United States. So it's not like Britain. It's not like the US. It's different. It has a colonized and neocolonial economic structure. Yeah, it's not the same. So you can't treat it the same. You have to understand it but brain capture means you think of the DRC as you think of any country. And so then you recipe policy. You say we should cut education, we should cut healthcare, we should stop subsidizing agriculture, we should kickstart the economy, we should, bring in entrepreneurs. Entrepreneur is the most hateful word to hit on people who have had their wealth stolen. How are they going to be entrepreneurs if there is no bank nearby willing to lend them money? Yeah. Or if they do lend them, it's at 18 to 25% interest rate. Yeah, much higher than anywhere in the West. So in that sense, this strangulation by the Bretton Woods institutions, particularly the International Monetary Fund, is very key. It's a central theme. But in order to understand it properly, we have to understand also the theme of brain capture. And Grieve and I have spent some years now building lists of people. Where are the economists on the African continent working in government or in the academy? Where are those African economists, who think about the African economy? Grieve edited a superb book a couple of years ago called Can Africans Do Economics? Now, the title might shock, some people. Liberals might get shocked by that title because they don't want that phrase on the table. Can Africans do economics? How offensive, they might say. In fact, Grieve is asking the question seriously. He's asking, can we do economics in a way that suits the African reality? It's actually a sincere question. It's not ironic. It's not funny. It's not meant to be funny, right? And it's not meant to merely rile up the liberal. It's asking a real question. Can you take the African economic reality seriously and start from there? And if you do that, you'll understand something. I'll tell you something about brain capture. I had a very interesting meeting with a senior professor of economics from Thomas Sankara University in Ouagadougou. Now, the name of the university is Thomas Sankara University. The professor says to me that, at Thomas Sankara University, there is no class on the thought of Thomas Sankara. Not only that, he says students don't read Thomas Sankara. So you mentioned Sankara's incredible speech on debt. That should be read by everybody. It's available online. But I'm saying to you something even worse than that. Yeah. Worse than the fact that not worse than that, but I'm saying something worse, which is that people in Burkina Faso are not reading Sankara. This is what we call brain capture. I'm not saying you need to go back to your, close the doors and only read things in your own country. Rubbish. Read everything. Be an internationalist. But at the same time, it's an absolute shambles if people in Burkina Faso are not reading, say, Sankara as a start.
Okay. Sister?
Yeah, I was going to say, just for our audience, can you lay out your 9-step template on the manual for regime change?
Wow.
Just so as we continue this conversation, people have a better understanding of what the steps seem to be. And, maybe even speak about, is that still running as we look at what's happening with Cuba, as we look at what's happened in Venezuela, and what's happening with Iran as well?
No, it's scary what you're asking for because it assumes I remember the 9 steps. Yeah.
No, I can list them if that helps.
Yes, please list them. Yeah.
So, you had lobby opinion.
Okay. That's
install the man. Yes.
No, lobby and opinion is absolutely essential even today. If public opinion is not with a government, it cannot overthrow another government. Yeah. So, for instance, remember how they said, this attack on Nicolas Maduro was because he was a narco terrorist. They had to fashion a narrative about him. He couldn't merely be the president of Venezuela or president who stole an election. And by the way, they couldn't say they stole an election because the CIA itself said that there was not that great irregularities. There are always irregularities in an election, but it was not significant. So even they knew that there was really no election theft, but they went in another direction. They said, well, he's a narco-terrorist. So they lobbied public opinion.
Okay.
And then the next one was install the man.
Yeah. So, you do need somebody either on the ground or near the ground to basically run traffic, because a coup d'etat is complicated. You got to make sure that if it's a military coup, that there is civilian section that is going to be okay with this. You have to make sure the balance between the civilian pro-US right wing and the military and the police and everybody, they are all on the same page. Somebody needs to be the conductor of the orchestra. You need that. Now, it's a good question to ask because in many of these countries, Cuba, Venezuela, and so on, there was no US embassy at the time. So there's no US person on the ground. On the ground is maybe anachronistic. You don't need the person on the ground. You need the person somewhere, virtually maybe even. But they need to have some sort of trust relationship with the key players. So this is where bringing the military to train with the US on a regular basis allows you to meet young officers who you cultivate over the years. Now, this is what the US government has been doing through, for instance, the AFRICOM, the African Command, is making connections with mid-level captains and brigadiers and so on. So you get to know them before they become generals. You get to send their kids to college in the US. You get to help them out, I'm interested in sending my daughter to the United States to study. Don't worry, we'll take care of it. She's going to get it. I know somebody who's on the board of trustees of the done. So you build loyalties in the military. And so there's got to be somebody who is the trusted person. This continues to be important, but no longer needs to be on the ground.
And your book really goes into detail about how these people were installed, a coffee buyer, things of that nature. In fact, you said there is that old joke. Why is there never a coup in the United States? Because there's no U.S. embassy there. I just thought that was insane. Okay, so the next step is ready the generals.
Yeah, so I think I already started on that, which is that, you got to prepare the military because these military connections are important. By the way, it's also got to the point where commerce comes into play. Because one of the amazing, amazing tools the United States has, so do some other countries, but the US, is it has the ability to get its arms industry to corrupt senior military officials in other countries. So you come in and you say, look, we just made a deal with the civilian leadership for $100 million worth of equipment. Here's how it's going to work is they are going to invoice us for 102 million, and the 2 million goes into your bank account, because that's your fee. And so you make the generals beholden to you. And, it's not just the US, but Israel plays an enormous role in this because Israel recycles a lot of US technology. The Israeli state military corporation has joint ventures with US military, companies, arms companies, and they recycle a lot of the technology so that because the US law doesn't allow the US to sell to certain countries, Israel does it for the US. And there's a lot of corruption involved here. You can put the generals in your pocket, basically. You take them to an arms fair, you film them, having sex with somebody, you film them getting drunk. I mean, there's so many ways to corrupt military officials, so many ways. And because they are so sensitive to being corrupted, or to being found out, that they are willing to do anything. This is one of the reasons why China has just basically thrown out its entire military commission. They just don't trust any of the generals. They just toss them all out. People say it's authoritarian. I just think it's house cleaning.
All right. So then the next one, which I thought was just really interesting because it can look like no one caused it. You said that step is make the economy scream.
Yeah, that line comes directly from Richard Nixon. He says it to Henry Kissinger regarding the buildup against Salvador Allende in Chile between 1970 and 73. Well, it's quite easy to do that as long as the US dollar remains the principal vehicle of borrowing, through bond markets and so on, and through the London and Paris group. When a country goes out to borrow money, especially if you are an importer of oil, you need to pay in hard currency, generally in dollars, but now in other currencies. And so you need to go out and borrow dollars. If they make it hard for you to borrow dollars, you're dead. Price of energy goes up. Nobody's there to help you. Yeah, you're screwed. And then if energy prices go up, if there's fuel inflation, there'll be food inflation, and then you have a coup on your hand.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then you have isolate and provoke unrest.
Yeah. So it is always helpful to get people to have a crowd on the street. In Chile, for instance, the political right wing, understood what was going on, and they mobilized their supporters, mainly middle-class housewives, to walk down the street, banging pots and saying we can't afford this. This is middle-class right-wing supporters. It wasn't the poor on the street. And so it's very interesting if you are able to mobilize some support, create some drama like this, you got matters in your hands. I mean, it looks like the government is unpopular and isolated. And then if there's a coup, remember, you mobilize public opinion. If there's a coup, you say, well, they did it to themselves. It has nothing to do with us. So you need some, what do you call it? You need some backup, on the streets. I mean, it's kind of fun having you remind me of these steps because I haven't gone through them in a while. Anyway, go ahead, please.
So I'm going to lump the last three, and that is green light, assassinate, and deny.
Right. Oh, good that you put them together. So green light is easy. Somebody blows the whistle. Let's say Washington has to decide, when to move. I think it's an art. It's not a science. You got to know exactly when to move. And so somebody has to be there watching the whole picture. How is the balance of forces? How will this be met in other powerful countries? Will anybody come to defend this government and so on? So that's a very important decision, Secondly, assassinate if the leadership remains popular and dangerous, like Salvador Allende, you got to take care of them. In Allende's case, they violently attacked the presidential palace, and he died. Either he killed himself or he was killed. It doesn't matter. They created the conditions for his death. You don't want him alive. He'd be a martyr. Yeah. If he went into exile, he would mobilize a different kind of public opinion against the country. Assassinate. They tried to assassinate Castro hundreds of times. Yeah. The old man never let them get him. Yeah. He was too quick for them. He's a wily fox. He died in his sleep. Much better. So, assassinate means get rid of the problem, really. Clean up. Yeah. You want to clean up. And finally, deny. I had nothing to do with it. We had no role. There were the people on the street. These people did it to themselves, etc., etc. And later, 30 years later, when you release the records on this, you say, well, yeah, we did it, but we don't do it anymore. You deny, you deny. Then you say we did it, but you deny you're doing it now. The US government does it all the time. We know that they conducted the coup against Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran in the 1950s. At the time, they denied it. Then when the records were released, they said, sure, we did it. But at the time, they then say, no, we're not trying to overthrow anybody. We're not doing anything to Venezuela. They're doing it to themselves. We're not doing anything to Burkina Faso. They're doing it to themselves. So this game of denial comes simultaneously with the 30-year rule, when they release the records and then terrify you. Remember, by saying we actually did it, they're scaring you. They win both ways. Yes. They deny it at the time. So they say we are completely democratic. We don't play these games. But when they do release the thing, it's terrifying, because you suddenly think, oh my God, we'll get assassinated. When they released the manual on assassination, there was hue and cry. I mean, there was all kinds of stuff in there. You can read it. It's an appalling manual. How to use a hammer, put the nail underneath the human nail. I mean, things like that. It's barbaric, yeah? It's interesting. If I read that in the context, say, of some anthropologist talking about torture in the Middle Ages or whatever it is, I would be horrified. But this was in our era, the modern era. Yeah, this is what they do today. They catch somebody, this is how they treat them. Okay, after 9/11, this is what happened in the dark sites, those prisons. This is what happened, the torture against people. It was brutal, waterboarding and so on, yeah? They want you to be scared. That's the point. They want you to be scared, yeah? They hold people in prison for years and years and years. It's not just about the people in prison. They want the rest of us to be terrified. Yeah, that if you go just slightly out of line, you're in maximum security. Forget it. Yeah, you're there. Forget it. You think this is about Mumia Abu Jamal. It's nothing to do with him. It's about everybody else. He's just the example. Every once in a while, they'll roll it out and say, look at him. Yeah, we're going to kill him. And then everybody says, don't. And they say, okay, we won't kill him. He's actually more useful to them alive than dead. Because when he's dead, he's dead.
Yes.
He'll be gone. But when he's alive, they can have him there hanging over your head and mine. And they'll say, you should thank your stars. We are not exchanging you for him.
Yes. So we definitely saw this play out in Libya, to use that as a very quick example. Where do you see this 9-step template being played out, worked out right now? And is there an entity that can actually challenge this, that can bring this to heel? Is it the UN? Is it the AU? Is it BRICS? Is it what response can we have now that we understand what the steps are to continuing this destabilization that allows the continued exploitation of Black and brown people?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's if you and I had an answer to that question, we would be less tense people. Yeah, we'd be less tense people.
We would be dead. Was that what you're saying?
No. Well, that's one way to see it. Yeah, but also we would have started this conversation in a different place. We would have started this conversation with much more confidence about a new world appearing before us. Yeah. But we started this conversation with trepidation to some extent. Yeah. I mean, I just watched Christopher Nolan's film on the Odyssey. And what I found so interesting about his interpretation of Homer's Odyssey is that it's another film about anxiety. The West is dying, and can there be any way to redeem the West, or to win the West back? I mean, it's fascinating that Nolan chose a Greek classic to. I mean, and I don't think anybody's really talking about this, but the film is about the violation of xenia, which is the code of conduct, how you treat your guests. Yeah. And in a sense, it's like the violation of the rules-based international order, that Christopher Nolan is almost saying that the West has violated that order and has created chaos. Will we ever be able to put it together again and remain the great liberal hegemon? It seems that that's what the film is about. So there's an acknowledgement in this, as in his previous movie, Oppenheimer, of the West's culpability, because even in that he's racked with guilt. Yeah, Oppenheimer is guilty. Why did we explode the bomb? We broke the code of xenia, of how to, we created this weapon of mass destruction. Yeah, both these films are about the West and its hands stuck in the mud, can't get them out to lead the way again. The West must lead. Yeah, that's the world we still live in, is that liberal people like Christopher Nolan want the West to lead. They want Telemachus, the son of Odysseus, to be the Gen Z from the West that leads the West beyond climate change and beyond, war and so on. That's what they want. And it's not happening. And they don't know how to deal with China, or they don't know how to deal with Russia. They can't overthrow these governments. Yeah. You can't do a regime change. You can't do a Washington bullets on China. It's not possible. You couldn't do it in Russia. Russia returned in a different kind of way. It's not the Soviet Union, but it's not Yeltsin's Russia either. And so the scale of these powers, even Iran, the scale of these countries is so much greater. Iran's capacity to inflict pain on the US, so much greater, yeah, than smaller countries, that could be taken care of. You can't do it in Iran. Iran stood up, 100 million people, couldn't be defeated, refuses to be defeated. Russia, China refusing to buckle. So the world is different now, and they don't know what to do about it.
So what's going to happen with Cuba?
Yeah, well, that's the interesting part. Yeah, that's the interesting part. Cuba has been through this before. Cuba went through this during the missile crisis, when Khrushchev, fearing that Cuba would fall, sent missiles to Cuba. Today, Russia, China, Iran, nobody is willing to have that direct confrontation with the US. That's not there. But Gustavo Petro, outgoing president of Colombia, goes to Cuba this last week and says we need international solidarity with Cuba. People don't want the government to fall. I don't know what's going to happen. It's really bad. 2 hours of electricity a day, it's bringing the island to its knees. Mexico,
they're making the economy scream.
They're making the economy scream. Mexico doesn't have the capacity to break the embargo. It could. It has done so a few times. So has China a few times, building solar arrays. And nothing is happening fast enough. Yeah, Cuba is the outlier here. I agree with you. Cuba is in a very difficult situation. But meanwhile, I would say the West is exasperated, because none of the old tricks will work against Russia, China, or even Iran. And that's why I've been thinking in my head that, hey, Washington bullets, that's one. What about Washington's missiles? A book about today, thinking about the lack of, you can fire as many missiles as you want. You can fire a whole arsenal. But these governments are not bending. Yeah. The Chinese are under threat from the US. They are just not buckling. They're refusing to do the things that the United States wants them to do. It'll negotiate. They'll agree on a few things, but they're not going to buckle. Yeah, they won't buckle. That's amazing. And that's a whole new scenario. So I don't know what's going to happen to Cuba. I hope that a magical ship appears and oil is delivered into the tankers and so on. I hope that happens. I hope a convoy will arrive from somewhere. But I don't think that's going to happen easily. Yeah, I think what was done to break the Cuba-Venezuela linkage has been part of this fatality. I think the government in Venezuela has gone very far, much farther than I expected, in accommodating the United States, inclusive of cozying up to Israel and so on. I think that this is extraordinary. Where has your Bolivarian fire gone? The Bolivarian fire, the statements about the sword of Bolivar and the revival of Bolivarianism. You can't on the one day talk about the sword of Bolivar and on the other day put it back in its sheath and hide it under your bed and go and talk to the Israelis. You can't do that. First time they say is your boldness, and the next day is absolute farcical. Yeah, I mean, what happened to your boldness? It has reappeared as farce. Now you use the language of Bolivar and Chavez, but nobody can hear it. Yeah, we can't understand your Spanish anymore. No entiende. It's not coming across. I don't know what you're saying. You still said Hugo Chavez, but you're saying it with Israelis in the room. I don't understand you.
I mean, you spoke to the use of Odyssey to highlight the decline of the global North. Is it not also ironic that the Odyssey was shot in Western Sahara, a disputed territory that the United States agrees belongs to Morocco against contrary opinion? Now, the question would be, if that film is supposed to point out the hypocrisy and we know the global North is dying, would you see that as some sort of opportunity for Africa to actually come into true sovereignty?
Yeah, I mean, look, the film was shot in a number of countries, Iceland, Greece, etc., but Western Sahara as well, which they call Morocco in the film. Yeah, they say Morocco. They say the film was also shot on location in Morocco.
Morocco,
Say Western Sahara. Just directly Morocco. It's an acceptance of a colonial reality. And I would have thought, frankly, that Paramount Studios would have thought this through, because that's dumb. Yeah. And I think, it's an opportunity for the defenders of the people of Western Sahara to come out and make a lot of noise about this. You see, I don't think it's worth saying, let's boycott the film. Because this film is going to be watched by a very large number of people. We need to control the narrative about, cultural icons like this. That's an opportunity for a debate. What's the debate about? For me, the debate is about the fact that the West has lost it. It would have been much more interesting for Christopher Nolan to have gone to another Greek classic, to Aeschylus's play The Persians, and dealt with Xerxes' failed expedition against the Greeks. Because in the Persians, the Persian Empire comes and is defeated by the Greeks. But in today's world, the Persians are winning strategically. Obviously not militarily. They have taken huge casualties and a lot of the country has been destroyed, but they're winning strategically. They've closed or rather restricted the Strait of Hormuz. Would have been interesting if Nolan had made his film called The Persians, used Aeschylus's drama, which is the second in a trilogy where the first and third part are lost. We know somewhat of what was in part 1 and part 3, but part 2 was the war that Xerxes conducted, and Darius, the first king of Persia, is furious about the war, says it's a useless war. Wow, this would have been such an interesting meditation on the US obsession with Iran. why in this case did the West attack Iran? Which is what happened. Yeah, the West, meaning Israel and the United States, because Israel pretends to be part of something or is part of something called the West. Why did they attack Iran? And so this was not Xerxes crossing, the rivers of Babylon to come to Greece. This was the battle going the other way around. I would have thought that's the movie to have made today. So these are the kinds of debates I would like to have, and bring up use this as an opportunity to bring up the question of why an American studio follows Trump. They accept that Western Sahara is Morocco. I thought Paramount and so on were liberal studios. What are they afraid of? Why did they go to Western Sahara? What deal did the Moroccan team
give them? Isn't Paramount under Ellison now?
Yeah, it's almost.
No, he's absolutely a Trumpster.
Oh, maybe this movie was Universal. Yeah, Universal was this movie. But anyway, whatever it might be, yeah. Wouldn't it have been interesting, or isn't it interesting to ask the questions of the integrity of the studio and what they are thinking about a live issue of colonialism? Yeah, I mean, look, in Ceuta, you saw in the last few days, 60,000, mostly Moroccans, crossed over into the Spanish territory. Again, part of the Moroccan king's games that he's playing here. Last year, 3,000 Moroccans entered Spain. 3,000 from all the crossing points. How on one day did 60,000 get across? Yeah.
Who were actually bused to the border.
There
were buses bringing them to the border. Yeah.
Yeah, 60,000. And, they came back home. They were on an excursion. They created a diplomatic incident, went home. It was almost like people coming for a political rally. They were basically bussed in and bussed out. And I felt bad for them. Interviewed in Ceuta, they were saying things like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know why there's no water. Why is there no food? People hate us here. We some of them said we'd like to get to Europe. I'm sure they did. Yeah. Why can't we just go? They were also confused. There were TV shows on the days before in Morocco saying that, Spain has changed its law. If you get there, you're there, encouraging people to come to the border. This is a game the Moroccan king is playing. Anyway, the point is there's a lot of debates to be had on the Moroccan king, one of two absolute monarchs on African soil, both of whom should be gone. The other being King Eswatini, also needs to be gone from Swaziland. My comrades and friends refuse to call the country Eswatini. They call it Swaziland. They don't care that that's the old colonial name. The reason they're doing this is like Mobutu changing the name of the Congo to Zaire. You can't Africanize the name and not pretend that you're not caring for Africans. You can't pretend that you're caring. Yeah. Just because you change the name to Eswatini doesn't mean that suddenly you actually care for the people of Swaziland. And so my friends say, no, we're going to call ourselves Swaziland and we are Swazis, and we're going to fight the king. So one of two absolute monarchs on the continent, the king of Morocco. You can't window dress absolute monarchy. Yeah. And by the way, there are lots of monarchs in Europe. There's a king of Spain, as we speak, they have a king. Yeah. I mean, I'm speaking to you from London, England. There's a king. I mean, it's ludicrous. Yeah. I mean, I thought we were backward. I was recently in Sri Lanka, a republic. Burkina Faso, a republic. Ghana, a republic. South Africa, a republic. Kenya, a republic. Yeah. But then, Spain, a monarchy. Okay, a constitutional monarchy. Why do you need a king? Who knows?
Minded, we're almost near the end of our show. I will allow my sister ask the last question, and then we'll take a close.
You're going to give me the last question? Well, yes, I'm going to say it this way. So I think this is instructive for any of us studying, whatever age we're, because you were just talking about the Thomas Sankara University, and yet they're not studying Thomas Sankara there. And I think it's noteworthy that before you started writing about coups and sanctions, your doctoral work was actually on the Valmiki, if I'm saying it correctly, community in India. The sanitation workers, how they were marginalized, one of the most marginalized castes there. And I bring that up only because I do believe that this liberation work needs to start at home. So I'm going to ask you what your thoughts are on that. And then you started off with a really hopeful note. Given all your research, what is that pathway? How do we hold on to hope? What work do we need to be doing now to ever be able to throw off this imperialism that we know they are not going to give up without a fight?
Yeah, excellent final question, because it goes to the beginning to come to the end. Like, I agree with you. You have to put your feet where you are. And, as a young journalist in India, I found quite devastating the reality of the Indian caste system. And I was interested in this particular community because this community is from my native area of Punjab in northern India, and half the population of Punjab were deemed to be so-called untouchables. A very interesting thing about Indian caste system is it's not exactly a color system. So that in Punjab, those who were degraded into or were denigrated as untouchables don't have dark skin necessarily, but they conduct forms of agricultural field labor that the owners of land don't conduct. It's very interesting. In India, you will get very high caste Brahmins with very dark skin, and you will get wretchedly poor Dalits, that is oppressed castes, with very fair skin. The color line is not the line; it's the caste line, and I wanted to understand that deeply. And also, I've been interested my whole life really in why humans, particularly why poor people humiliate other poor people. What is the requirement of humiliation? Why do we do that?
Wow.
Why do, for instance, working class men put working class women down as an example? Why is that? Why can't we stick up for ourselves? Or why does one community put pressure on another community? This thing has bothered me for a long time. Why is solidarity such a beautiful word and so difficult to enact? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so really, when you talk about hope is an idea, and it's related to solidarity, because, community, solidarity, hope, for me, these are really synonyms. Yeah. Community, solidarity, hope. If you don't have solidarity, you can't build community. And if you can't build community, what is there to hope for? Yeah. You're just hoping for your individual advancement. That seems limited. Okay, you advance, there's nobody there. It's lonely. That's lonely at the top. What did you get there for? You betrayed your community. Yeah. You betrayed your community, got there for what? Yeah. For what? So community, solidarity, hope, these are synonyms for me. And in that sense, as synonyms, words that are interchangeable with each other, as synonyms, as a young journalist, I sought this out everywhere, and I continue to seek it out. I like going to places where people are trying to build, I know this word is also losing its meaning, but where they're trying to build community, where they're trying to build a social world, they're fighting against social atomization. I don't know if you know this, but 1 billion people struggle with loneliness. 1 billion people, 1 in 7 people struggle with loneliness. almost 100 people an hour die of loneliness related diseases. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of people. We don't have enough community. People are lonely, you know. I mean, I'm glad for these platforms. Yeah. I'll say this to close. I'm glad for these platforms. It's brought the three of us into conversation with each other. Yeah. I'll go to my room now, reading a very nice novel. I'll read it. I'll think about our conversation. I'll think about, your faces, the joy you brought me for the hour, and this, that, and the other. And I think that, we created a little community for an hour, in a sense. Yeah, we listened to each other. You took such great interest in my work that I feel a debt to you, and that's going to make me feel happy. I'll feel a debt to you. It'll make me happy. I'll feel that, I have a debt to pay, which keeps our community alive. Yeah, which keeps us going and so on. So, this is how we survive. Yeah, we do lead a lonely existence as humans in this age. Yeah. But we find ways around it. And I think that's, to me, meaningful. And I would say that, we want to change the world. We don't want the world as it is. But we're also not stupid. Yeah, we understand the people we are up against. And we understand the difficult climb. It's not going to be easy, but we are ready.
Yeah. Yes, we are ready. And reach out and, relate to other people. You've heard the great author, Vijay Prashad, Washington Bullets.
Get all his books.
The Darker Nations, the Poorer Nations as well. His latest work on Cuba, and enrich your mind.
And I didn't even ask you about Noam Chomsky and the Epstein files, but
yeah, that's a painful
we'll end
episode.
on a positive note.
Yeah. That's a really.
I do want to say this. For those who have not read any of your books, there is such a beautiful.
The ease.
Yes, the ease in which you write, the passion that comes forth, the love that you have for humanity shines through. And meeting you today just confirms everything I felt as I was reading your work. So thank you so much for this not just being an academic exercise or, getting another check mark or, bestseller or whatever. You are really doing a work from the heart, and it comes through, and it is such an honor to meet you. Even if it's virtual.
Thanks very much, really.
No, thank you for coming through. Thank you. And to all our guests, next week we'll continue the conversation along headlines about Africa in the Western media. We've had the honor of having Comrade Vijay Prashad here. He's taking you through, all the questions. He's even touched on even the latest on the African continent within Quetta and Metila. And next week, we'll continue the conversation. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to the good comrade. Thank you to my sister. And until next week, it's good night and God bless. That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.